Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second session of the Path to 100% Clean Energy Education Series. My name is Lillian Anderson, and I'm the Director of Energy Programs at Virginia Conservation Network. Virginia Conservation Network is the partnership of over 160 different environmental organizations doing work across the Commonwealth to advance environmental protections at the state level. And we are so glad you could join us today. This three-part webinar series is designed to give policymakers, candidates, advocates, and community members the tools and knowledge they need to understand Virginia's clean energy transition. So where we stand today, the key policy pillars driving progress, and the possible pathways ahead as we work towards a 100% clean energy future. As Virginia works towards meeting its 2045 zero carbon requirement in most of the state, energy demand continues to grow. While the total energy demand calculations differ depending on who you ask, experts have started to look at different ways to meet worst-case demand projections while remaining on track to meet our clean energy goals. Today's session, Meeting Demand with Clean Energy, will walk through a recent modeling exercise done by Ideasmiths, an independent consulting firm, which explored different possible projections in which clean energy reliably meets worst-case demand scenarios in the Commonwealth and in a more affordable way than the proposed plan to do so with new fossil fuel infrastructure. We're so fortunate to have three outstanding speakers with us to guide this conversation. First is Nick Laws. Dr. Laws is the Director of Modeling and Analytics at Ideasmiths. Ideasmiths delivers actionable insights for its clients, from deep dives on technical due diligence to high-level assessments of market trends. Ideasmiths helps its clients understand current and future challenges and opportunities for the energy industry. Dr. Laws also works at Camus Energy, where he researches, designs, and develops methods to decarbonize the grid faster. We also have with us Josephus Allmond, staff attorney at the Southern Environmental Law Center. Josephus joined SELC in 2020 and handles solar cases at the State Corporation Commission. He assists with air and energy-related work in front of the SEC as well, and participates in agency-led stakeholder processes on behalf of SELC and in agency-led rulemaking and permitting processes. He also leads state legislative efforts to advance equitable distributed energy resources policy and clean energy policy. Lastly, we have Peter Anderson, the Director of State Energy Policy at Appalachian Voices. Peter leads Appalachian Voices Virginia campaigns and state policy work. He also co-directs a multi-state program on equitable energy transition. Peter joined App Voices in 2016 and has significant experience advocating before the Virginia General Assembly and state agencies, and he serves as a client representative in several legal matters. So we'll begin today with a presentation from our speakers, followed by time for your questions. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window to submit questions throughout the session. And with that, let's get started. I'll turn it over to Josephus.
I'm just going to be brief and introduce Nick, and he'll get to the substantive slides. But just wanted to talk a little bit about the impetus for this modeling, why we thought it was important to take on. So this past year in 2024 in October, Dominion filed their integrated resource plan that they file every couple of years. Historically, what SELC has done on behalf of Appalachian Voices in those dockets is just look at what Dominion has put forward and sort of critique those plans. But given the extraordinary amount of projected load growth that Dominion had in this plan, as well as sort of the tension meeting that load growth and the VCEA goals, we really wanted to go out and put forth some of our own work to really see and make sure that what we're advocating for, this clean future, is attainable. And so we talked to some great firms, reached out to an old grad school professor to see who was good in this modeling space. And Ideasmiths, after talking to them, we realized they had everything we were looking for in terms of the technical ability to do the modeling, but also to look at the environmental justice harms that would result from going down a more polluting path. So we were excited by sort of their range of capabilities. And we learned a lot going through the modeling exercise with them over the last several months. I'll let Nick get into the substance of it, but we're really glad to have them on hand and to help us show that this path to clean energy by 2045 is attainable, even if all of this load growth comes to fruition, which we have some doubts about. But it was just a good gut check for us to know that what we're advocating for is possible, is attainable, and is actually the better option long term for Virginia. So I'll turn it over to Nick and let him discuss what we did.
Thanks, Josephus. Yes, hope everyone's having a great Friday. Nick Laws have already been introduced, so I won't be too much of my background. Just a little bit of background on Ideasmiths. We were founded by doctors Michael Weber, Charlie Upshall, and Josh Rhodes about 2013, I think. So we're at 12 years now. I direct the modeling and analytics for Ideasmiths, and I co-authored this report with Josh. And let's see, so I'm an expert in techno-economic optimization and energy system modeling. I formerly worked at National Renewable Energy Lab and also lead the power system modeling for Camus Energy, a software as a service company for utilities. We work with a diverse group of clients, including some of the largest energy companies in the world, data center developers, financial and legal firms like SCLC, as well as foundations, universities, and any other group interested in answering hard questions in the energy space. So as Josephus mentioned, this report sort of extends the Dominion IRP. So our first step was recreating it. So through discovery, we obtained all of the same inputs that Dominion used in their capacity expansion planning model, so in both cases, we're looking to find the generation mix that meets all of the requirements at the minimum cost. So that's with the exception of the VCEA 2045 requirement, we sort of started from the same launching point, right? So Dominion's model went to 2039 using the required 15-year horizon from PJM. We took their inputs, extended them out to 2045 so that we could give the model that requirement that all carbon emitting generators must retire by 2045. So this slide kind of gives a high-level summary of several of those extended scenarios from the report. We're looking at the million metric tons of CO2 over time per year. So starting today in 2025 and extending out to 2045, and then it's zoomed in there at the end. So the first scenario I'll draw your eye to is the solid blue line on top. That's the VCEA 2045 without EPA. So this model had the requirement that it should meet the carbon retirement requirements by 2045, but it could not because we used Dominion's assumptions, which the most important ones were the limits on generation technologies. So there wasn't enough clean energy resources to meet the demand in that model and get to zero carbon by 2045. Then stepping down to the orange dashed line, this is the 2045 with the RGGI cost. So you see when you include that cost of carbon, you do get less carbon in future years, but the model's still constrained by the capacity it has available to it. So what we see in the next scenarios, like the green dashed dot line, is we doubled the amount of clean energy available to the model. So that includes solar PV, wind resources, battery energy storage, and small modular reactors, nuclear resources. We tried to keep everything as close as possible to Dominion's model. Dominion did not include traditional nuclear in the IRP, so we kept that the same in our model as well. So you can see that green dashed dot line does have lower total carbon in 2045 than the first two scenarios. And then if we extend those limits by 3 times in the 3x clean energy, we're getting much closer in that red dotted line, getting down to just under 5 million metric tons of CO2. And finally, there are 2 scenarios that we demonstrated that are compliant with the zero carbon requirement. And that took, in the 2 different cases, either expanding the battery energy storage limits even more by 6 times or the nuclear limits by 6 times. So these are just two potential pathways to get to that zero carbon requirement, not necessarily the only two. As Josephus mentioned, we also looked at the environmental justice and social costs. So sort of in two lenses here. First, we have the sort of local pollutants, if you will, from the power plants. So you have in each column here across now, the Dominion scenarios are using the same names they did. So we have VCA with EPA, without EPA, and then with the RPS, and then the same variation on those. Looking at the nitrogen oxide damages, sulfur dioxide, and then particulate matter in the first three columns, and then the sum of those damages over the IRP modeling horizon 2024 to 2039. So you can see those total costs range from an additional about $7.4 billion, excuse me, to $13.9 billion. Then on the right, we have the CO2 damages, and these are both of these estimates are considerably low. We use the RGGI costs here to estimate the damages of CO2. Determining the total social cost of carbon dioxide is a very fuzzy space. It's hard to give a good hard number. So if we use the RGGI cost as a good proxy, we get about 10.4 to 12.24 billion dollars of total damages over that 15-year planning horizon from the Dominion IRP. Now turning back to the 2045 horizon scenarios that we created, here I'm contrasting them with one of the 2039 horizon scenarios and how the decisions you would make differ when you can see that 2045 zero carbon requirement or when the model is extended out into the future. So on the top is the existing natural gas capacities in three different scenarios. The solid lines show the sort of our 2039 baseline scenario. And you can see in all three of those scenarios compared with the two compliant ones, we see some capacity retired in the next few years. Those are the most expensive generators within the current mix. And so it's natural to retire them. And then you can see the cliff in the 2045 scenarios, that is retire all of them by 2045. The key difference here is highlighted in the red lines on the bottom for new natural gas generators. So they start at zero today, right? And when you look only to 2039 as the Dominion IRP did, it is cost optimal to install roughly 2.5 gigawatts of new natural gas generation. Whereas when you know about the zero carbon requirement in 2045, it is not cost optimal to install any new gas generation. So with the short-sighted view of 2039, it's likely to lead to these stranded assets, right? And big cost losses for the utility. So diving into more detail here, this is the year-over-year cumulative capacity that the model selected for the first compliant pathway. This is with the 6x limit on battery energy storage systems. So the bottom, the gray bars, you can see growing significantly out to 2045. That's the battery energy storage capacity. And you can also see in the total trend the load growth, right? So we're getting more and more capacity because we're getting more and more load. We're using the same load forecast as Dominion here. And then in the maroon bars are the existing gas capacity. So those get slightly smaller in the early years, but stay online until the end in 2044, where you can see it's mostly replaced by the purple or nuclear capacity there in the final year to retire those carbon emitting generators. The yellow bars are showing the solar PV capacity, and we'll look at those numbers in more detail in next slides. And on top of that, we have wind capacity. And then the other parts you're seeing are the coal, which essentially just stays the same until they're retired in 2045. That's the orange bars. Same with the pumped hydro, the pink component.
Hey, Nick,
Yep.
while we're here on this slide, I think it might be beneficial for some of the listeners, since in this webinar view they can't interrupt you with a question. I'm going to anticipate a question. So could you say a little bit about how a modeling exercise like this works. Like, I don't want folks to get confused that like you chose, to add battery storage where Dominion chose to have gas. Can you talk about how you like set parameters and then the model chooses and get into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, the literal objective of the model is to meet the demand and all the other constraints we give it at minimum cost. So it's selecting the resources to meet demand at the lowest cost, including meeting the capacity reserve requirement, right? So the reliability requirements, including meeting renewable portfolio standards, seeing that zero carbon retirement in 2045, the RGGI costs in those scenarios that we included that. So whenever you see RGGI in the name, we're including the carbon costs. So all of that and that is a omniscient model. It can see the entire period when it's making those decisions. It's not looking at 1 year at a time, that it doesn't have a myopic view. So it's the best we can do, right, given the limits we've given the model. So in the difference between this case and the Dominion case, one is the extending in time, but also relaxing the limits on clean energy generation. So their model, chose more gas because it couldn't choose any more cleaner or cheaper resources that would minimize the cost over the entire planning horizon. Hope that answered it.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
Explaining large optimization models is never easy. This is the other compliant pathway showing the same chart, right? Total capacity over time in the planning horizon, but now with the instead of going 6x best, we've gone 6x nuclear here, and that's shown out right in the final year here. We have much more nuclear capacity to meet the load, and less total storage capacity. In both cases, the model ultimately did build as much storage as we allowed it to in the final year, not necessarily in every year over year, but by the end it said, yes, I will use as much storage as you'll let me. And that's, I think, primarily is the benefits come with the variable renewable energy resources, right? The battery allow you to time shift those resources. And so they're primarily the renewables act as an energy resource, but the batteries can also act as a capacity resource for meeting your capacity reserve requirements. Another key thing to note is that we also only allowed the model to build 4-hour batteries using the same assumptions as Dominion in all these scenarios. So this shows, rather than showing cumulative capacity, this shows changes in capacity over time in the 6x nuclear compliant scenario. So starting today, you can see two negative values. Those are the retirements of existing gas generators that I mentioned earlier. And then you're seeing positive, yellow bars for solar additions, green for wind. Some of these are planned within Dominion's territory already, and then storage additions as well. So you can see, significant amount of storage coming online in the early 2030s, paired with looking at gigawatts here on the first line. If you can see my mouse, but those yellow bars are all about a gigawatt of installations in the early 2030s. And then looking at the latter 10 years, you start to see nuclear coming into the mix, right? These are the purple bars. So we have solar and yellow still, batteries in gray, and now solar installations coming in the late 2030s, early 2040s to start meeting that growing demand with the knowledge that we need to retire the gas generators by 2045. So this is zooming in on the cumulative solar capacity in the two compliant scenarios. The gray dashed line is the limit that the model is seeing. So we're saying you could build up to this many gigawatts in each year. And you can see that actually it's only installing up to about 12 gigawatts of solar by 2045 in both of the VCEA compliant scenarios. I think this number is lower than most people would expect. I think it might be bigger if we were allowing longer duration energy storage, but also shows that it's a reasonable amount of solar installations. Now, turning towards costs rather than capacities here, these are three scenarios with the 2045 horizon, but that do not meet the zero carbon requirement. So, these are all in the neighborhood of about $130 billion over the entire planning horizon rolled up into present costs. And you can see the majority of those costs are made up by the fixed costs, that is the capital costs of new capacity, the fuel costs and the green bars on top of the fixed costs. And then we have capacity market purchases as a small amount in that maroon bar. Then the CO2 or RGGI costs in the gray bars, and then renewable energy certificates to help meet the RPS in the pink bars. So again, these scenarios aren't able to meet the 2045 requirement. So looking at the two scenarios that we looked at so far on the right here, summing up to what's called 147 billion on the average, right? We also looked at one sensitivity for the 6x best scenario. We changed the Dominion's battery cost assumptions to use the National Renewable Energy Laboratory's annual technology baseline, or ATB, values. I believe this used their conservative numbers for the forecasted battery costs, year over year. So you can see we get a reduction of about $11 billion in this scenario using the NREL ATB battery costs. All right, so this is my last slide, and now we're zooming in on just 2045 and looking at the total cost of fuel to meet the load in 2045 across different scenarios. So in the first scenario here, the VCA 2045 EPA RGGI, this has no changes in the Dominion inputs except for extending it out in time. So we still have their same capacity limits and all their requirements. See, the fuel costs are just over $5 billion in that scenario. And then similar to the way I showed the carbon emission, changing over time, this is going across those scenarios as well. So this second bar has the 2x clean. That is, let's double the amount of solar PV, battery, nuclear, and wind that is available to the model. And so we get about a $3.3 billion fuel cost. 3x clean, $1.7 billion. You can see that the orange part, the light oil, is essentially gone in this scenario, using much less gas. Nuclear is about the same as the 2x clean. Finally, in the compliance scenarios, all the fuel costs really come from nuclear, right? Because all of the gas and coal and light oil generators have retired in 2045. And an interesting point here is that if we were to assume the fuel costs stay the same for, say, the next 4 years from 2045 and roll that out to 2049, then the price difference between the non-compliant and compliant scenarios becomes negligible, right? So it's sort of paying back over time to have those much lower fuel costs. All right, so that's everything I had. With that, we can open up to questions, and I'm sure we can get everybody the full report who would like it. Also, feel free to reach out to myself at nick@ideasmiths.com.
Thank you. And so I'm hoping to close this out that Josephus and Peter, you two could talk a little bit about how these modeling results are informing how you're thinking about the work, this path to 100% clean energy moving forward. And of course, anything else you want to add, you have the floor.
Do you want to kind of take turns here, Josephus? Because I prepared a long list.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay, I'll give you my first kind of impression after sort of absorbing and thinking about these modeling results. And I think it's important to underscore it's just kind of written in the conclusion section of the Ideasmiths report, is that it's by allowing that model to see that there's a legal requirement in 2045. It shows us, this modeling has shown us a way that we can meet keep the lights on by meeting the capacity reserve requirement, because that was a require a law, a rule in the model, right? It's clear that we can keep the lights on cost effectively with no new gas resources added, right? So those, like the model shows, the gas that we already have online today stays online mostly during that planning period. But it just underscores the importance for me that as we environmental advocates have been opposing new investments in gas for environmental reasons, but it's clear, given the requirements of the law today, that it's also just not cost effective to add new gas to meet that electricity demand. So I think it would actually be worse for ratepayers to bring on new gas resources. And so I think that's kind of like my big takeaway from this modeling.
Yeah, and I'll just say I think me and our entire team has been really energized by this modeling and sort of getting that validation back that the solution that we're pushing for is not only possible, but is actually the better solution. And so I guess I would just highlight that we sort of look, even though we did find two scenarios that get us to 2045 net zero by then, we do sort of consider this analysis like a worst case analysis for a couple of reasons. One, we use Dominion's projected load forecast, which includes all of their projected data center growth out to 2039. And while we definitely agree over like the next few years that data center growth is going to grow substantially given all the contracts in hand that Dominion has, we do differ and think that their forecast in the later years is overstated. And so to the extent that not all of that data center load shows up over that time period, that'll mean sort of less total resources to meet that demand. So we think that's sort of one reason why it's sort of the worst case scenario. The other is that Nick mentioned that we were trying to be as apples to apples to Dominion as possible, which meant that we only use the same resources that Dominion did. And so we did not include solar plus storage. We did not include 6 or 8 hour batteries or longer duration storage technologies. We didn't include virtual power plants. To one of the questions earlier, we stuck with what Dominion did on energy efficiency, but there are other ways that you can model energy efficiency even as a selectable resource. And so, once you incorporate all of those things, the different resources and more aggressive energy efficiency or demand side management, you think we also cut down the total number of resources needed. And so, we sort of look at this as the worst case, but I think that gives us comfort because these load projections are significant. And so knowing that we can meet even sort of the worst case load projections, I think has been really important for us. And then sort of going forward, Nick showed the first 10 years of build out. And so that's sort of how we're thinking about this is in 2 phases. So this first 10-year period, we want to build batteries, not gas. So, we have those couple of retirements of the least efficient gas generators early on, and then just staying the course in terms of what's in the Clean Economy Act, in terms of solar build out, the CVAL project, and then adding serious amounts of storage capacity over and above what's required in the Clean Economy Act. So, Nick walked through a couple of portfolios there, and the numbers for storage were 20 gigawatts and 40 gigawatts. Right now, the Clean Economy Act only tells Dominion to build 2.7 gigawatts. I saw Delegate Sullivan in the chat. He had a bill that would have significantly expanded storage this year, which is a great first step, and we want to build on that. And just thinking about all the different ways we can get more storage online in the next 10 years. So whether that's the grid scale stuff whether that's behind the meter stuff for residential or for small businesses or commercial, or front of the meter distributed solutions that can help relieve congestion on certain parts of the grid. Their Danville Electric Utility right now is building out their second 10 megawatt storage project, and the two storage facilities that they've got are going to save them $20 million over the next couple of decades. And so, just really touting the benefits of gas from a cost saving, and also for sort of keeping us in track with our clean energy goals. We see this next 10-year period is really important for batteries in Virginia.
Yeah, and
Oh,
I'll tug
go
on
ahead.
just a couple points that Josephus made at a high level from a modeling perspective. Like we showed two compliant pathways in the Ideasmiths report, but there there's thousands of compliant pathways out there. You can discover them by testing your assumptions, right? I think that's really key here is that the report shows is that when you test your assumptions, you can get better informed decisions. And so it's almost falls on the umbrella of sensitivity analyses. But when you look at Dominion's IRP results across their four kind of high level portfolios, they all look pretty much the same. They didn't really do much testing of assumptions. The other key part is updating your assumptions over time, right? Like the question was asked about the solar tax credits, right? Like, oh, something has changed. We should change those inputs to the model and rerun it and see what it tells us now. I hope for a world in which policymakers can quickly iterate on those kinds of questions with complex models like these. Hopefully we're getting there towards that direction with open source models like Genix that we use for this analysis. But I want to put those tools into the decision maker's hands in an ideal world as a modeler, right? And so you can run those sensitivities, find all those different ways to meet the requirements, see when you change a policy, how does it affect the decisions? So that's sort of my modeler's hat for a moment.
And I think Nick, that's such a good point because we've been viewing the results of the two compliant pathways as, potentially we kind of see it as like a roadmap, right? And so if you look at those two compliant scenarios as a roadmap for policy, what are you doing? Well, you're doing the things that Josephus just said, right? Like ensuring that we're rapidly bringing on battery energy storage as fast as possible in the near term, sort of a no regrets decision, right? Whatever we can do to induce more storage onto the grid. But then we should iterate, like you're saying, Nick, and learn in 5 years the demand curves may look a lot different. The cost assumptions may look a lot different, and so it will be important for us to have that, keeping the lights on, meeting the zero carbon requirement at least cost might be a continued iteration.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that a little bit as it relates to that sort of second 10-year period that I mentioned earlier. And so, as we continue to get better numbers on what the load forecast is, that'll really inform the amount of zero carbon generation that we need to come online during that second decade. And so, trying to get the demand forecast in good shape. There's, the Dominion rate case right now, and the proposed large load rate cap class could help getting that forecast more in line and getting some speculative numbers out of there. But we like the fact that we have this first 10 years to build storage and to get a more concrete load forecast. That way, we know sort of the amount of stuff that we need to build in that second decade. That's the zero carbon stuff, and whatever technology at that point has sort of emerged as the front runner in the model that Nick did. It was SMRs because that's what we use. Traditional nuclear could also fill that role. Enhanced geothermal advancements in that could open up more areas in Virginia for that. So just sort of gives us some time to evaluate these emerging technologies and make good decisions about how we're going to deploy them in Virginia.
Or even fusion, right?
Or even fusion, like the proposal down the road in Chesterfield.
I do see, Lillian, I see there's a new question has appeared.
Oh, thank you. Okay, one new question from the audience. We used to hear about energy efficiency as a big part of how we achieve zero carbon. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, we certainly still see it as an integral part. And while we did use the Dominion assumptions, which included their assumptions on energy efficiency, I don't want to give folks the impression that we agree with those assumptions. We just wanted, for presentation's sake, for our numbers to be as apples to apples as possible. But we do think that Dominion needs to be doing more on energy efficiency. They haven't hit the targets that were prescribed to them in the Clean Economy Act. And we want them to hit the targets that were just established for them and exceed them from 2026 to 2028. Because that is, to the question's point, the cheapest and cleanest form of energy going forward, the energy we don't use.
And just to pile on there, so in a different proceeding, the commission recently set, I think it was in February of this year, I think it was when the order came out, new energy efficiency mandated targets for Dominion. And then in the order in this proceeding, the commission ordered Dominion in its next IRP to model achievement of actually hitting its energy efficiency targets, which are much more aggressive going forward than they were in the early years. And Nick can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way it just works out in the modeling process that Dominion used, they don't put energy efficiency as like a selectable resource for the model. They just remove it from the demand side of the equation and then let other resources be selected to meet that demand. Is that right, Nick?
That's right. Yeah, and I was going to mention that too, is I think to the energy efficiency, the question asked, energy efficiency we've heard of is a big part of how we achieve zero carbon. I think that's also because it's usually a first step, right? Before you decide how to meet the demand, what is your best estimate of the demand? And that demand should account for your best stab at energy efficiency first, right? So that's why it is still very important. We're looking at these crazy load forecasts now, but over the recent, like last 10 years, last decade, demand growth has been relatively flat. And that's a big part of that is due to energy efficiency. We've been electrifying loads, we've been increasing and adding loads to the system, but other loads have been going down, right? Parts of our load have been getting more efficient while we've been adding electric vehicles and induction stoves and electrifying industrial processes. So that's why we've had flat growth in the past decade.
And there's another question in here. Do you all have a plan for when you might do this modeling again moving forward? And how often do you feel that this kind of modeling would need to be done in the future?
So I think Dominion's required to do it on a 2-year basis, right, Josephus?
Yeah, there's the fully litigated IRP proceeding every 2 years, and so we'll get the next, formal filing from Dominion in October 2026. And then they do have sort of off-year IRP updates, where they continue to go through the stakeholder process and sort of update the numbers in their modeling. And so we're following along that stakeholder process and are working with Nick and his team at Ideasmiths to see what we might be able to do to update some things on our end as well, because we do think it's a really important resource going forward.
Thank you. And sorry, I interrupted your flow a little, Peter and Josephus. Did you all have anything else you wanted to add on how your organizations are thinking about this work moving forward?
Well, since we're talking about energy efficiency, I do think that there was some good discussion in the last legislative session in the General Assembly about if data centers are creating this crunch, putting a lot of pressure on the system as they try to interconnect as quickly as possible. Are there things that we can do that makes their load flexible so that they don't stress the system as much as they otherwise might. And so I think there's some more good work to be done in terms of data center companies being able to use sort of demand response type technologies and maybe incentives for demand response that they might respond to that allows us to add large new loads without having to strain the system or build as many expensive resources to meet that load as we might otherwise have to do.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. There was a really great paper that came out earlier this year. It's called Rethinking Load Growth from the team at Duke, including Tyler Norris. But to Peter's point, it sort of highlights, if we just required our large loads in PJM to be flexible for, 0.25 hours or percent of the year, that could unlock something like 18 gigawatts of additional capacity in PJM without the need to build new generating resources. And so I think, the impact from flexibility from these large loads is really hard to overstate.
On the data center point that they're traditionally data centers aren't willing to be flexible because they just want to do their thing. But given the constraints on capacity expansion in the grid, they're coming back to the table because they're losing approximately these are hyperscaler numbers, but on the order of $7 million per megawatt of load they can connect per year. It's their estimates. So for every megawatt they can get connect sooner, they can bring in that revenue, right? So they're coming to the table now, kind of looking at it with whatever it takes to get our load on the system.
All right. Any final thoughts, Peter, Josephus, or Nick?
I'll sort of just close out. We're really energized by the fact that this modeling sort of shows us a path forward. But one thing I don't want to go without being highlighted is that environmental justice damages and CO2 damages slide that Nick mentioned earlier. In the Dominion proposal, what they propose to do, which is building a bunch of new gas and not retiring anything, you need to expect those harms to continue every 15-year period throughout the end of the century. And I think the great thing about the scenarios that Nick identified is that by getting carbon down to zero in 2045, those health harms for local communities cease, and our contributions to climate change globally cease. And so, as we're thinking about how to right the wrongs of our history of energy development, I think keeping that in mind is that we should be striving to ensure that those communities are not harmed any longer.
Thank you all again for joining us today for the second session of the Path to 100% Clean Energy Education Series. A special thank you to our speakers, Nick, Josephus, and Peter, for sharing your expertise and your findings. We'll be sending out a recording of today's webinar to all participants, so you'll have it as a resource to revisit and share with your colleagues. We also hope you'll join us for the final session in this series, where we'll continue exploring Virginia's transition to 100% clean energy. The next webinar, Energy Storage 101, will take place on September 23rd from 1:30 to 3 o'clock. And thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next time.